Hello and welcome to the third installment of my Dungeons and Dragons campaign diary, where I'll be talking about my heavily homebrewed Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition campaign, summarizing the events of the game each week, talking a little bit about how I run the game with certain house rules and homebrew, and just generally talk about the different lessons that can be learned from every game. Getting right into the video, I don't have any kind of big thing to start out with, other than the fact that this session is a little bit special because one of my friends from high school, Mike, has joined the campaign, so now there are 4 players instead of 3. He'll be playing a rogue who will eventually become a thief rogue, but we'll get into that more with the actual summary, so we'll just get right into that then. The game picks up where the last one left off, with the party stuck in a hole, arguing about how they're going to move all of these grape seeds that are buried in this tomb to the god of wine. Taliesin, Bo's character, determines that it's going to be too heavy to haul everything, with the seeds being in barrels, so the party's going to have to go and get bags to put them in because they'll just weigh less, even though taking all of it is still going to be heavily encumbered for the mule that's pulling the cart, and it's going to greatly reduce how fast they can travel and makes traveling just more difficult in general. There's further discussion about what they're going to do with the seeds. There's a little bit of a back and forth, but eventually Rhinos takes charge and says that the best course of action would be to try to con the Baron of the town into signing a contract where they get a plot of land and then they plant the grapes, and then once harvest comes around, they'll pay back a certain amount of money, with the trick being that they're just going to rip him off and not pay him. But before they actually do any of that, what they want to do is actually get the grape seeds out of the dungeon, so they climb up the rope and head back into the village, where Mike's character is introduced. As established, I'm not really good with just introducing new characters, so he gets introduced when the tavern keep just throws him out of the tavern in front of the party because he kept drinking, making a mess, and wasn't paying his tab. Because he is a new player and a new player character, and the party knows that this guy is not an NPC, he's the person that needs to join them, they just bring him along. Before entering the Baron's house, they explain to Mike's character, whose name is Ronnie, that they found this stuff and they're trying to sell it and they're going to try pawning it off. It's a whole thing. They explain to him basically a summary of what they've been doing the past couple days. And at this point, I think it's either now or maybe even before, Bo's character Taliesin says something along the lines of, I hope your tongue is as smooth as your plan, or I hope the plan goes as smooth as your tongue. Some really weird non sequitur that it seems like it's going to be one thing, but it's not. Like, I thought it was going to be like a subtle insult where she's like, I hope this plan goes as smooth as your brain, or something like that. Basically calling him stupid because the idea of like trying to con a baron. If some random adventurer tried making a legal contract, like, he's the baron, what's gonna happen? You're gonna either go to him to settle it, or you have to go up, which is the earl, who is gonna know who his baron is, isn't gonna know who this random adventurer party is. And it's not like there's lawyers and stuff where you have rights that are being defended rigorously. It's basically nepotism in a feudalistic society. You don't really have rights. No one's gonna believe you. But it's just a really funny moment, and it does come up later, which we'll get to. But for now, the party goes to the Baron. Well, they try to. Obviously, the Baron has guards at his door. Taliesin was going to try talking to them because she has very high charisma. Unfortunately, her nationality is that of Greyland, and people in this country don't really like them. So she just gives the help action to Ronnie, who has the second highest charisma in the group because he is a thief rogue character, so he has really high persuasion. And he talks to the guards, and there's basically an establishment of like that this one guard was at the tavern and he was drinking with him, so he's friendly with them because he rolled really high on the check. It was like 21 or something. So the guard lets him in as long as he stays on his best behavior. They go in and see that the Baron is being read a bunch of letters by one of his scribes. The party doesn't get too much information from that because they're not really actively listening to it. It is something involving the neighboring county of Lockhart trying to petition the Earl of the county they're in, that being Chandler, to like help with something, I'm gonna put a map up on screen. But the Baron ignores that and then asks the party what they want. Jan's character Camille makes a really good intelligence or insight. I'm not quite sure which one he makes. Basically makes a really good check to realize that plan probably not going to work out, and the best course of action would be to just do anything else. And last second, Rhinos changes his plan to just say, hey, we saved that girl and we're looking for a reward. With a decent persuasion check, the Baron, who has heard about this, just gives the party one of his silver goblets. It's, I think, only worth like 2.5 gold. I'm not sure. I have it written down somewhere, but the party didn't ask about how much its price is, so they did a check to identify it. Unfortunately, there is no appraisal skill, but they determined that it's not very expensive, but it does have silver value because it's made of silver. And not wanting to expose their plans, they decide to just leave and then go back to the tavern as it gets dark out, pay a bunch of the people who were drinking with Ronnie earlier to come and help dig out the entrance to the dungeon, and that way they can load everything up onto the cart after putting them in bags and then leave. It only costs them like maybe 2 gold at most. It's less than 2 gold. Just a couple silver to pay a bunch of guys to go dig up the tunnels. The next morning, after it's all dug up and they have everything loaded up, they go back to the previous town they were at and sell off a good deal of their seeds for a total of 50 gold pieces to a member of the Merchants Guild, as it's established that this entire settlement doesn't really have a baron or a group of knights looking over it. It is almost entirely run and occupied by the Merchants Guild. While there, they decide on what to do next, which rumor to follow up on. There's some back and forth, and ultimately they decide to go investigate the fort first, which I'm glad they did, because if they didn't, then I'd have to change the encounter, which we'll get to after the encounter at the fort is explained. It takes them more than a day to get there because they have to camp at night. The night is uneventful, and as they approach the abandoned fort, they see a few well-armed mercenary men standing guard with a bunch of horses. What's very obviously 5 freshly dug graves, and the final person, who appears to be one of their captives, obviously belonging to the other member of the group that was skirmishing with them, who was being forced to basically dig his own grave. Initiative is rolled and the battle begins. It is the party versus 3 mercenaries armed with pikes and 2 that are up on the battlements of the abandoned fort with crossbows. Rhinos runs up and begins fighting with one of the pikemen. With a good persuasion check, he encourages the captive, who is digging his own grave, to fight back. The shovelman, as I've dubbed him, hits one of the pikemen over the head with a shovel, does some pretty good damage and knocks him prone, but after that he just runs back to the cart to kind of get cover because he is unarmored and doesn't really have a good weapon. He's also like already badly injured, and he rushes back while Taliesin flings magic stone at the men on the battlements who are firing crossbow bolts down. I think one of the bolts hits somebody. I'm not sure who. The entire fight, the crossbow guys don't do much damage to anybody. In fact, they probably do more damage to themselves because the one guy crit fails, so his crossbow breaks and the wire, the drawstring, snaps and slashes him across the face for quite a bit of damage. And he climbs down and eventually tries to run away and get to one of the horses so he could just flee and possibly become a reoccurring nemesis, because he now has a unique characteristic in that slash across the face and a personal reason to go after the party because attacked him and killed his comrades and scarred him. Not directly scarring him, but their actions indirectly led to that happening. The pikemen begin to advance forward. There is a moment where one of the pikemen rolls really well and goes to hit Camille and rolls maximum damage for a total of 12, which would strike down Rhinos, which is unfortunate because I'm not used to their tokens yet, so I confuse the two and say that he was able to hit Rhinos. However, after it's established which one's which, we just reverse that, and because the roll wouldn't have hit Camille, it's just a mulligan. Nothing really happens. He's back up, and everyone's fine for the time being. Ronnie, Mike's character, makes a short bow attack, and I think he whiffs it, and makes a dive into the open grave to get some cover because he is very squishy, being a rogue. Rhinos rolls a crit fail on a short sword swing, so the repercussion for that is the pikeman basically hooks his hand with the pike and sends his short sword flying, and then he goes to make an unarmed strike, which he fails again, so he just kind of punches him and doesn't do any damage because he missed technically. And after that, Camille just smashes a guy's head in with a warhammer because Camille was the most powerful character, kind of, at least so far, in that the weapon he has a lot of damage to it. He hits consistently, and he also has spell casting to increase his damage significantly more than anybody else currently has. I believe he does try casting a healing spell on himself at some point, but he fails. Again, because we're using a roll to cast system. One of the pikemen moves past the grave, unaware that Ronnie is in there. Ronnie goes to stab him, and I suggest he uses a sneak attack because, again, Mike is a new player, doesn't know too many things. But Usopp says that he can't do that because rogues don't get sneak attack at level 1. I wasn't entirely sure. I was gonna check, but he said it with such confidence that I decided, oh, I guess that's not the case then. Because I know that they get all their other stuff at second level and third level, so I assumed, well, maybe not. Turns out I was wrong, so he could have actually had sneak attack the entire game, but in most situations, he wouldn't have actually changed much because whenever Ronnie attacks somebody, it typically does a lot of damage, to which he stabs the pikeman who's approaching him and just cuts him for a lot of damage, stabbing up and into the Achilles tendon. With massive damage, he's basically crippled. He is knocked prone. He's going to try to get up on his turn, but he can't. And then he tries to stab at Ronnie and succeeds and does like 8 damage. He just basically leaves Ronnie with 1 HP. And this is either when Jan tries to do a healing spell and it fails. The important thing is that Ronnie is still gravely injured while in the hole. They keep making attacks and are actually out damaging the mercenaries. Taliesin crit fails a magic stone and ends up killing an innocent bird in the background because it was funny. The broken crossbow mercenary goes to run to the horse to escape, but Rhinos runs up and stabs him as he gets on the horse. And after that, one of the pikemen run over and stabs him and takes him down, so he's making death saves. And then I believe Ronnie hits him with a short bow, so he's dead. Camille tries to bonus action cast Healing Word, but he fails again on the spellcasting check, so he instead casts Spare the Dying on Rhinos, so he is stabilized. With the spellcasting system we have, you have to roll to cast spells, the exception being cantrips. Cantrips are something that are supposed to be intrinsically known to you. It's basically like a part of yourself, an innate talent you have, more so than your actual spells. So he doesn't need a roll to attempt to do that. You just do it. And I don't know if he was the last one to die, but it's funny if he was. But the other crossbow guy on the battlements at the top of the abandoned fort tries to climb down the side to escape, but he fails, falls, and takes enough damage that he falls and dies, which was really funny how anticlimactic that guy's death was. With the mercenaries dead, the shovelman explains that he is under the employ of the Earl of Lockhart, which, again, putting that map back up, if I didn't take it down already, neighboring county with an important message. Very similar to how there was a messenger trying to say something to the Baron about the Earl of Lockhart, trying to get something out of the Earl of Chandler. World building stuff that the party just doesn't seem to care too much about right now. But he just takes his equipment, leaves behind his comrades, and goes rushing off with one of the horses. Obviously, he's on a very important mission if he's leaving behind his dead bodies, and they're already buried, at which point they decide to dig up the bodies to loot them, where they get some leather armor and some spears and short swords, which they ultimately sell all of the gear of the mercenaries and the other group sent from Lockhart for money, except for one of the crossbows and the crossbow bolts. Eventually that is given to Camille later on before they fight some quote-unquote orcs, but we'll get to that when we get to that. There's two really funny Taliesin moments here. The first one being that she says that it's wrong to dig up the dead and that at least the mercenaries had the common decency to bury the dead, at which point it's pointed out that no, they were making a man dig his own grave. That is not the common decency at all. And the second thing is Ronnie successfully opens up the lockbox, and it has 250 gold, which is probably more gold than any of these people have seen in their lifetime so far, which Rhinos claims for himself. And Taliesin says something along the lines of, I think what Bo was going for was something along the lines of, like, your eyes being bigger than your stomach or something like that. Like, the point is, like, don't go crazy with the thing. Don't spend it all in one place kind of thing. But he says something along the lines of, you know, my grandfather would always say, think with your brain and let your eyes do the work, or something very weird. And it's not even like a Yogi Bearism or like a Rickyism. It's just like a crazy non sequitur that doesn't really mean anything. And going into like the world building thing with the Chandler Lockhart thing, the basic gist is that there's an upcoming immigration crisis where a bunch of people from Greyland are going to be coming to Emerald, and the Earl of Lockhart, knowing that people don't really like them, wants to avoid some kind of catastrophe. And to tie into the world building, a big reason why the occupation of Greyland by Emerald is such a big deal is because, like, again, it's like parallels to the occupation of Ireland by England, where the invading force doesn't view the people they're invading as smart enough or worthy to govern themselves. So while they are being heavily exploitative of the people, there's like this kind of just self-justification of, well, these people would be lost without us anyway. Like, they'd be savages unless we came in and governed them. And obviously that's wrong. You can't just show up to a sovereign nation and declare them unfit to govern themselves. And obviously that'd be the case here. It'd be a whole interesting thing. However, Taliesin is not making the Greylish look very smart. So maybe it is justified. Maybe they can't govern themselves. Maybe they do need this other people to come in and govern them if they're coming up with crazy non sequiturs like that. But getting back to the actual encounter, if the party went to the other rumor first before coming here, when they showed up here, the mercenaries would have been gone. There wouldn't be nearly as much loot. And instead of there being one survivor who is digging his own grave, there would be 5 dug graves that are filled in, that he obviously had to do, and then the mercenaries just killed him and then threw him in the pit without burying him properly. So they all would arise as undead, as they were not given their last rites and not given a proper burial, and the party would have to fight him and then maybe dig up the other ones and lay them to rest or give them a proper funeral or something along those lines. But they showed up just in time to save him. With that encounter done, they decide to go back to town and take a long rest, which, again, because we're doing like gritty realism, extreme edition, the long rest takes an entire month, and as they're staying in town in pretty moderate housing, all their expenses paid will be 120 gold, which Rhinos pays for. And as we are doing the XP to level up system, spending gold for long rests for your quality of life would contribute to your leveling up. But because he claimed the gold for himself and then he's paying for everybody's stuff, he claims all of the XP. So everyone else has some gold, but he has more gold and also 120 XP. So he's ahead of everybody, which seems to always happen. So the other people are going to need to be a lot more proactive at acquiring wealth and keeping it for themselves, because it's going to be a fight for every last penny. During the long rest, Camille sells the merc loot, and he claims the 160 gold that comes from that loot, and also what they looted off the dead bodies. From there, they ride to Mossstone, the town to the north, which, again, hopefully I'm remembering to put up maps for this stuff, where there were reports of orcs attacking. If you remember back in The first episode, the first fight they had was with goblins, and then a goblins and an orc. So Rhinos and Taliesin have experience with orcs, and when they get there, what they're told is that orcs have been robbing people, which they know doesn't sound right because orcs in the setting are just violent. They don't rob you, they kill you and loot you. They don't extort you. They don't beat you up and let you go. They kill you. But there's an entire town that has been cut off from supplies for a while. Everyone's afraid to go in or leave because they're afraid of getting robbed. The guard is standing put because they think that any day an orc raiding party is going to burn down the village, so everyone's paranoid. They're pissed off. There's not enough food going around. Everyone's hungry. And when they talk to some people in the tavern, mainly merchants who got robbed, they make some insight checks, and the merchant says that it was orcs, that it was big green people who beat him up and took his stuff. And he makes reference to a lady orc, which the party doesn't pick up on, but they do insight check him and determine that he's like being honest. He's way too angry about this to be BSing them. They can't really work out an angle why he would lie. But what they do is decide to camp on the road, and hopefully they get ambushed, but they are prepared, so it's not really an ambush. They're just waiting for the orcs to come to them, and while camping out, they notice people approach, watch them for a little bit, then flee, to which the party gives chase, and they are led back to a small wooden fort that has been set up probably a while ago. These individuals probably just found the fort and set up camp there. It is nighttime, so keep that in mind. All of the orcs have torches, which is strange because orcs can see in the dark, which again should have took them off, but they don't really pick up on that. Also, again, a lady orc, which they don't pick up on, but we'll get to that in a bit. They all fail stealth checks except for Ronnie, who sneaks around the side, and he basically climbs up the wall and makes an attack against one of the orcs and kills him really easily, like way too easily. And that's when they realize, okay, these are obviously not orcs, something's up here. There is some range attacks and more fighting. Camille takes his time to run around the fort to get to the entrance, where he kills a guy. Rhinos climbs up the wall and fights with the lady orc. She only tries to shoot Camille when he runs past, once they see him, but she doesn't get a turn before Rhinos goes up there, does a lot of damage, and then kicks her off the wall, killing her. Taliesin spends most of this fight just trying to get to the fight because she can't really see over the wall because of how short she is. She also doesn't have a torch, so she's relying on a very small cone of dark vision because she is a Raven Queen warlock, so she has some dark vision, but not enough to see what's going on. Although the orcs do have torches, so she could see them, but once they fall over the wall, then she can't see them anymore because there's no light on the wall itself. Camille splatters some more people, Ronnie does some more damage, and then it gets down to 3 orcs. One of them tries to flee on horseback, and Camille is there and hits him, knocks him off, and kills him. The horse still runs off into the distance, but that guy's dead. One of the other guys disengages and runs away into the night, and he just drops his torch. None of them are close enough so they can't really see him, so he's gone. And then there's one guy left. And they know he's not an orc, but there's something weird going on here. But they're fighting him. Mike wants to do things a little bit differently, so he climbs on the wall and tries to throw a hammer at him. It's not a light hammer, so it's just a regular improvised weapon attack with strength, which is a -1 in. He rolls like a 5, just throws it 5 feet in front of him. Not very impressive. And then Rhinos runs up, and he might get a hit off on him at one point. This guy is slightly injured, but up until people got close to him, he's been taking the dodge action, so no one can really land anything on him. Once Rhinos goes up, very similar to the pikeman, he tries to do a short sword attack. Crit fails, so the guy hooks onto his short sword with the underside of the axe, sends it flying. Rhinos goes to do an unarmed strike, rolls really poorly, so the other guy catches it. And this is, to spoil it, this is just people dressed up as orcs to scare people to give over money. They're using the moss from all the rocks and boulders around the town, which is why it's called Mossstone, to make makeup to disguise themselves. But this guy's dressed as an orc, fighting against insurmountable odds, standing his ground. And now the other guys are crit failing. He's actually doing damage. He lands a pretty good hit on Rhinos. I am impressed with these rolls, so the god of war and orcs, Brucus is what I've called him, is probably also impressed. So I decide, okay, this guy's new thing is that whenever he makes an attack and it lands, he can make another attack. I want to see how far that chain goes. And he makes one against Rhinos, hits, goes to make a second one, crit fails. Everyone wants this guy to live because he's so interesting and is putting up a good fight, and no one could get a hit on him. But with a crit fail, he falls backwards into the campfire that was set up there, and he begins burning alive, screaming. Camille, not wanting this guy to die because he wants a nemesis, tries to heal him with a spell, but he crit fails the casting roll. And if you crit fail a casting roll, there is a serious negative repercussion. It could be you want to cast Fireball, crit fail, it's centered on yourself. Or you try to charm someone, crit fail, you're actually charmed by them. You try to summon a familiar, crit fail, it's an imp instead that wants to attack you. That kind of thing. So what does crit failing a healing spell does? Well, normally I'd have it so it just damages them or damages the person trying to do it, or it transfers life over. Instead what I do is, okay, this guy is now going to just be an orc. He's going to have died in the fire and be reborn as an orc on fire, to which he runs away screaming on fire, obviously to return later as a nemesis. Usopp is a little upset that he wants to kill him. He makes an opportunity attack, even though realistically he would have just disengaged, but he does. He doesn't do enough damage to kill an orc that's been reborn, so he does like 1 bludgeoning damage while the other guy's on fire. He's undergoing a metamorphosis. Damaging him isn't going to do anything right now if you're not doing serious magic damage. And instead he takes like 1 fire damage as he touches a guy who's on fire. With all of the so-called orcs dead, fleeing, or a combination of the two, they look around, find a bunch of trade goods, and decide that they're just not going to haul around all the trade goods because they have enough weight on their cart already. I should also say that they took the 2 riding horses and they have them carrying the cart now, so they could carry a little bit more stuff, but not a whole lot more. And rummaging around, they find 25 gold pieces, and various different changes, but about 25 gold pieces. And then as they return to town after that, they bring the bodies with them, explain what happened. The merchants and travelers go to get their trade goods back from the encampment, and they talk to the baron of this town. I think Camille jokingly asks for like his daughter's hand in marriage, and I'm like, well, do you want that? He's like, no, I don't. I'm like, okay. He was probably just going to give them a little trinket that had some gold value. They wanted, like, permission to, like, get land, but they realized that he can't really give them land. He's not really that high of a guy to do so. So instead, he writes 2 letters of recommendation, basically saying, here's me writing down what you did. We had his scribes do it, but basically saying, these guys right here, pretty cool dudes, consider giving them missions so they could go and climb up the ranks and possibly get land. And he made one for Chandler, the county he is in currently. However, the Earl of Chandler is a paranoid mess who doesn't care about his own county. So he's like, take this, talk to him if you want to, but it's probably not going to do anything. Also, here is a recommendation addressed to the Earl of Lockhart. Again, that other county, which hopefully I'll put back up again. As you can tell, I want to usher them towards that direction because I have a lot of stuff planned for that county too. That's not to say that I have nothing here. I have like 3 areas planned out, and that's one of them. Basically saying, that guy, he's been trying to like do something, get all of the northern counties to unite for something. Basically, that guy is on the money, he's doing stuff, he's a good guy. If you want to be more heroic and rise up the ranks that way, then go talk to him. Although he doesn't really have any authority to do anything because he's a baron of a different county's earl, so it may not really mean all that much. But with their little letter of recommendation acquired, they see a path to acquire land, and they're going to pursue it. I assume that's what they're going to do. They seem dead set on acquiring land, so they're probably going to go to Chandler first and then see what the situation there is. And then, if not, go somewhere else in the country. And that is basically the summary done. And now I want to talk a little bit about the world building of the setting and also future plans for the party, things that they could do, encounters they could have, all that kind of stuff, because it's kind of intertwined to a degree. So we're gonna talk about that whole thing right now. So this second part is recorded a day after I finish editing the entirety of the summary section. If you don't know, I usually take 2 days or maybe even 3 to kind of record everything and edit it down, because if I talk for 40 minutes straight, I'm just gonna burn myself out. But the important thing is that I had some time to talk to my players, and there is the agreement that they're gonna go to Chandler's Cove, which is the capital of the county of Chandler, which is the county they're currently in, and attempt to talk to the Earl of the county and kind of schmooze up to him and do some missions in the city in hopes of getting some kind of land deal out of it. And if that doesn't go well, then go south to Lockhart County and then do stuff there. Now, traveling that far is going to take a couple weeks. The map, which I'll put up again for the third, fourth time now, you see each of those hexagons in the hex crawl is 1 week's travel time. So there's going to be a lot of random encounters and traveling throughout the entire adventure. But that's not going to happen yet, because currently they're in the northwestmost corner of the continent country, and Chandler's Cove is going to be their main focus for right now. If you happen to be one of my players listening, then maybe stop listening now, because I'm going to talk about my plans. Just mute the video and keep it playing in the background so I get that engagement. But anyway, so it might be obvious, but the name Chandler's Cove is a reference to the internet creepypasta Candle Cove, which there is some inspiration for an encounter I want to run, where there is basically a little puppet show box in the capital that is maybe possessing people. I don't want to go too much into it, but it's basically like a little haunted performance thing. And the reason the Earl of the county is so paranoid is because his character is heavily inspired by the H.P. Lovecraft story, The Alchemist. If you haven't read it, go read it. It's one of his better stories, which that comes across like I don't like most of his stories. I do like most of Lovecraft's stories. I just think that The Alchemist is like one of the better ones. Or if you don't want to read it or listen to someone reading it, which I recommend you do, because listening to people read stuff is easier than actually reading it. But if you don't want to do any of that, go listen to the Blue Oyster Cult song, The Alchemist, off of I think it's their latest album. It came out a couple years ago, but there's a song called The Alchemist, and it basically retells the H.P. Lovecraft story from the position of the antagonist, who is the titular alchemist. Really good song, really good story, and I use that inspiration for this character. And to double down on the H.P. Lovecraft inspiration, part of the world building is that the relationship between Emerald, the country the party is in, and Greyland, the country that Taliesin is from, Beau's character, which is basically the relationship between England and Ireland, as I talked about before. And one thing that was established in-game is that the Earl of Chandler does not allow the Greylish into his city, which it's a port city, so a lot of people are coming from that country because it's right across the water. So his orders are, when they show up, kick them out of the city and send them south, either to Grenway, which is directly to the south, or to Lockhart, which is to the southeast. And that is because he's a character inspired by Lovecraft and his writings, so he's obviously going to be extremely xenophobic. Famously, H.P. Lovecraft had a near-complete breakdown when he found out that his family comes from Wales instead of Britain proper. So one could only imagine the horror he'd feel if he discovered he had Irish lineage. And this guy, the Earl, probably does have some Greylish lineage, just because the trope of the racist who has the genetic lineage of whatever race he's bigoted against in his bloodline is like a classic trope, and it's funny. Although I can't imagine the party's gonna dig into his heraldry and like uncover that much stuff. Although maybe they do. But basically my plan is that if they solve a lot of mysteries around Chandler's Cove and actually like earn his favor, then he'll basically invite them into the keep and basically task them with finding this thing that's haunting him and dealing with it, and they'll be able to go and dig through all the paperwork and possibly put some stuff together. Now, the relationship with Grayland ties into Talison's character and the desire to acquire wealth and land, and elite status ties into Rhinos, Usopp's character's whole thing. The two things that are going to tie into Mike and Jan's characters is that Mike is playing a rogue, as I've been talking about for the past 30 odd minutes, and being in a larger city will give him more opportunities to steal things, pickpocket, pick locks, sneak around, pull heists, all that kind of cool thief stuff. And I want Jan's character Camille to interact more with religious figures, so I'm going to put a temple to one of the gods in the pantheon that he kind of follows. Now, he is a follower of Sornir, who is the god of the forge and of dwarves. I've talked about this. And the temple I want to have here is belonging to Rem, the goddess of sleep and dreams and storytelling. So it's an opportunity to interact with another religious faction that is not necessarily adversarial because they all worship gods who are in alignment with each other. It is a polytheistic society where they acknowledge the other gods as being real, but they just specifically follow these ones because this is where their interest lies, and here's where their oaths are made, and that kind of thing. Also, Rem is a more so magic god, so there's going to be opportunities for there to be like spellcasters in the city that the party could interact with or even fight. And I've mentioned it before, but this is a generally low magic setting. Now, the players can make characters that are as magical as they want, but NPCs are only so magical. Most priests don't know cleric spells, most knights can't do paladin magic. Most of the chieftains of the pagan, druidic types don't know too much magic, although they might know one or two spells. It is very Lovecraftian in that there is magic, but it's weird and strange, and it takes a lot of resources to know any of them, which again just puts the party on this pedestal of truly exceptional individuals, which is how all adventuring parties should be to a degree. Now, I know I have made rules to make these people more vulnerable. They don't have as much HP, leveling is a bit more difficult, they don't have access to as many resources, they're not super special comparing them to normal D&D protagonists, but compared to the common man of this setting, they are remarkable, so just keep that in mind. Now, another thing I want to do that isn't really tied into Chandler's Cove is the party now has a nemesis. Well, more specifically, Camille, I guess, because he created him, but the party in general has to worry about that not orc guy that got set on fire and ran off into the woods. And I'm thinking of bringing him back as, well, obviously he's going to be an orc. He got, like, transformed because of war magic and fire magic and all that crap, and critically failing a spellcasting check. But he's, like, a monster now. And I think I want him to be kind of like a war cleric. I want him to be like a grim reflection of Camille, Jan's character. Because Camille is a forge cleric, and if this guy's a war cleric, then there's this kind of duality of fire and war, as they are part of each other. They bring about each other. You can't have war without the forges, and war causes destruction and fire. So the way I want to have them work mechanically is that maybe not next session, but the following one. What I want to do is basically have like a D20 or a D12, something like that. And at the start of the session, I'll roll it. If it is a 1, then I'll go down a die, so it goes from D20 to D12 to D whatever. And once it gets down to a D4, and I roll a 1, then that guy's going to show up again. So again, roll a d20 if it's a 1, roll a d12, roll it until it becomes a 1, and do that forever until it gets to rolling a 1 on a d4. This guy shows up. I'm probably going to give him 1, maybe 2 levels of cleric just so we could have that going on for him so he's dangerous. Hopefully by then the party will be a level 2, maybe 3. I can't imagine he's going to show up super quickly. And he's probably going to have a little warband with him, so the party could fight them. This guy could fight Camille and Rhinos because they created him. and he's probably going to try to flee again and then just repeat the cycle, but coming back with, again, another level and more guys. And I want him to slowly grow with the party until they finally kill him. And then maybe by then they'll have another nemesis to fight. And it should be said that he is not an overarching villain. He's just a reoccurring antagonist. He doesn't have one grand scheme or a grand plan. He's just in the world, pillaging, stealing, burning, and then he occasionally runs into his adversaries who he fights because he hates them. I have a few ideas of overarching antagonists. Basically characters in the world who are always doing evil, or not even necessarily evil, just things that are antagonistic to the party consistently, and either because of distance or the power differences, but they're always going to be doing it, and it's always going to affect the party in some negative way. And the example I have currently is that if the party keeps doing magic, and I should say if it's not Camille doing magic, if he's doing like clerical magic and healing and basically doing miracles, he's not going to show up. But if Taliesin keeps doing warlock magic, and if any of the other PCs die and they decide to play an arcane caster and is just doing more arcane magic, then I want a witch hunter type character to show up. Some kind of like Reverend John Hale figure. Like Solomon Kane meets the Witcher is basically going to try to hunt them down because he's a witch hunter. And obviously he'll have like some followers and influence in the world and that kind of thing to keep him safe to a degree. And I do have a bit of a backstory plan just because it was an idea I had for a character that I'm just going to recycle into an antagonist. That's the thing with DMing, is if you have a lot of like ideas for player characters that you're never going to play, just make them antagonists. You just have to understand the rule of killing your darlings and accept the fact that the party is going to want to kill them, and they're going to have to be bad people, or rather people that the party is going to want to fight, and they can't be perfect at everything because that's not a fun challenge, and it's a bad antagonist if they never fail. So just recycle your character ideas into villains and then have the party kill them. But his backstory was basically when he was much younger. He's like an older man now, but when he was much younger, he was recently married and his wife was pregnant and they were homesteading, and he cut down a tree, but inside that tree lived some kind of fey creature who, using magic, turned his wife into a chair to basically say, well, how does it feel to have a thing you like turn into a piece of furniture? And the guy, having no understanding of how magic works, has just been traveling around the country carrying this chair with him, keeping it safe so it never gets hurt because it's basically his pregnant wife in stasis, while he goes out and kills magic users because he feels they personally wronged him when they kinda did. But again, that totally cool and epic backstory is only gonna come up if the party meets the conditions that actually justify this character's existence. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep it on a sticky note, the back of my whatever it is notebook. I just have a bunch of tabs open with ideas written on them on my phone in my notepad app. I don't actually have notebooks because my handwriting is atrocious. And most of my ideas are archived in this game diary series anyway, so it'll always be around for me to come back to if it comes up. But if it doesn't come up, I'm not going to be bent out of shape about it because there's a lot more things the party can be doing than fighting that one guy in particular. Another overarching antagonist is probably going to be the Earl of Morlock, which, again, putting the map back up, I want him to be this kind of cruel and gluttonous ruler who is very authoritarian and capitalistic and imperialistic and expansionist, basically very conniving and Machiavellian. And I don't know if I want to make him an actual magic user, but I do want him to be like a collector of magic things and supernatural things. Imagine Jack Horner from the Puss in Boots movie, but rated R instead of PG. And it is a character that I did have in a game before, very similar to the Earl of Lockhart, where both those characters come from the original iteration of this setting, which I played in a kind of it's not really a West March. I'll eventually make a video talking about this whole terrible D&D experience, but I did run a few one-shots, and these were major characters. Both had the opportunity to become antagonists, and they kind of did, but it's a long story I won't go into. Just know that they do have their personalities fleshed out, and they're probably going to interact with the party in some degree, purely because they are rulers over wide areas of land that the party is going to eventually travel through. So they're going to experience the consequences of their actions. I mean, they already are. The mercenaries they fought were sent by Morlock, and the messengers that the mercenaries killed and the one that the party saved was from Lockhart, so they're already interacting with them to a degree. Also, relating to the idea of future plans, my idea for how high the party gets level-wise is maybe like 5 or 6. Now, usually in the games I've ran, we started at level 3 and usually ended around 6 or 7. So this campaign will ideally be a little bit longer, but it'll also involve a lot more characters coming and going, or rather showing up and then dying and then more show up, because the game is very lethal. And basically my plan is, once the party gets kinda high level and established and it becomes obvious that there's no like super serious threats to them in their current position, then we're just gonna do a time jump to like the next time period and restart at level 1 and then go from there. Right now they're in like the Renaissance era, late medieval, early Renaissance, and then maybe the next time they'll go to would be like Enlightenment era, Victorian era, and then after that maybe like, I don't know, cowboy times, like the mid 1800s, and then after that go to like the 1920s, which is around the time that my first real like big campaign, which these players are from originally, except for Mike, he joined recently, but Jan, Bo, and Usopp, and also the one player who could not keep playing halfway through my previous game, Tenzo, were all part of the urban fantasy game, which was the first one I ran, and that took place around 1920. So by the time they get to there, I'll have everything all kind of fleshed out a bit more. I'll have a lot more experience DMing, and then I can make that basically second try at that campaign be a lot more consistent and focused. Because that game was not focused at all. There was also a lot of ideas that were just abandoned because I couldn't find a good way of implementing them, or they just got passed over for other things. But that's a very long way down the line. It's not something we're going to have to worry about for a while. The party is only level 1 still. It's going to be the 4th session, and yeah, I'm probably going to give them enough gold to get to level 2 halfway through the 4th session, so that way, through the tail end of it, and then starting at the 5th session, then they're going to be level 2. Because currently, Usopp and Mike don't have their subclasses, and I do want them to get those pretty soon. Other than that, I'm just going to start fleshing out the location of Chandler's Cove and Chandler's Keep and the church that's there and a few surrounding areas, just so the party can actually do stuff in there for a while. And I'll talk about that more in the next game diary when they actually go there and interact with them. And yeah, if you have any suggestions for what the party should do or any ideas, then comment them down below, because that would help with engagement. I recently surpassed 200 subscribers and I'm currently at 207. And I want to get to 250 before I make my next big subscriber special video, because I kind of sat on it for a while. So that's something I'm going to be working on the side. But my main focus on this game diary and things related to Dungeons and Dragons, I have a fish tank thing planned, but that's again a side project. But yeah, I don't know how to end these videos still, so if you like this content, if you want to see more of Game Diary stuff, then subscribe. If you learned something or have any inspirations or thought some things were funny, then like the video. Again, if you have suggestions for what the party should be doing, then comment down below. These videos are pretty sporadic because I just don't always have the right amount of time to work on them. And our games end late, so I can't start them immediately. So there's always going to be like a weird schedule for these guys, so if you want to know when they're uploaded, then turn on notifications. And yeah, thank you for watching and or listening. I apologize for the poor quality. It is not going to get any better.